Hi, my name is Mavis, and for this summer, I was working with MCDC and Chicago's TIF Illuminator project as a part of the Civic Lab at DePaul. Um, and yeah, this is kind of like an overview of how our summer went and the tools we created. So in the beginning, we all got a rundown of basically how TIFs worked. Personally, I wasn't really familiar with what TIFs were because I'm not from the area, but um, yeah, I think it was really shocking news. And all this data was just located on the Chicago's website, but no one really did anything to kind of bring it out. So yeah, I'm glad we were tasked with that. And to do this, we kind of brainstormed ways to help automate um, filling out the spreadsheet that was used each year, since originally it had been hand populated, which took a really long time since there are like over 100 districts, TIF districts each year, with a bunch of other values. So through this research, we saw that there are some Python libraries that could help us with this task. Things like Tabula Pi, which really helped with um, collecting the data, like scanning and not scanning, scraping the data from the PDFs. Beautiful Soup, which helped us get the data directly from the website rather than having to download all of the PDFs. And then Pandas, which is kind of like it, it helped us organize all of the data in data frames instead of just like separate variables. And then our tool and the other interns can chime in if I miss something, but um, our main tool is a PDF scraper. We built it in Python, um, and basically it just scrapes the data from the PDFs on the Chicago website and cleans them and stores them in a dictionary that is returned as a CSV file that we can then use to populate the spreadsheet. And this was a step up from previous years just because this process really only takes like a few minutes rather than like hours that it took to like hand enter all of the values. Some obstacles that we encountered during this was um, that sometimes the data wasn't really presented in a user-friendly way. Um, a lot of the times, like the data was kind of just freestanding. So we like on the document, so we had to like code in the coordinates on the PDF to make sure we were scanning in the right location. And kind of going along with that, like PDFs prior to the year 2017 were scanned in rather than like online PDFs. So that also posed a challenge to us because the data wasn't as clear to read for online scanners. So then we would have to hand check these values too. Um, some of the data visualization apps that we had were a Shiny app that um, basically takes in all the data that we were able to get from this past year, as long as the previous years, um, and put it in a heat map of each district. And this heat map really it showed, or the colors are based off of how much property tax was extracted from each TIF district. So the darker will be like higher, or like you can see the difference.
So I can
And
talk
oh
about
yeah,
the Journey app a little bit more since I think Mavis, you and Will were more focused on getting the PDF data scraper taken care of. And so after the PDF data scraper was done, that made my job really easy for trying to figure out how to get these data visualizations working on the Shiny app. R is the, I guess, coding program that I'm a little more familiar with in previous years. We were looking at Anthony Moser's Streamlit app that he put on the website and kind of trying to like see how we could improve that. And really the only obstacles that we ran into was we grabbed the shapefile from the Chicago Public Data Portal. I'm not sure, it said the shapefiles are created by community users. So it's not specifically Chicago that provided that data. The only data that we got that Chicago provided was that information from the PDF scraper. But we did have to add a new shapefile from this year that wasn't previously made, and it was not updated on the Chicago Public Data Portal. So that was the shapefile for the Red Line Extension District to get that shape for that community. And we added that into the existing shapefile, and then we merged all the PDF data information along with that shapefile information so that we could get that Shiny app and the data visualizations looking good, and we could present data as far as where communities were the highest, like money was either extracted from or distributions were from, just things like that. So that's as far as the Shiny app goes.
Yeah, and the second data visualization thing was the Google Earth Engine app that Will made. If you maybe want to go into it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I can just share my screen for a second if you guys want. So first, let me just. So I made a little like front page for it so that the average user who might not understand all the data variables and all that, so you can first read like what the actual different features are of the app, but then also like a little brief explanation of what each variable is that's shown in the app. So then in here you can change the years, and you can also change what variable you want. And the variable is going to, in the legend it says like these are the top 5 values for the variable, and the red outlines are the bottom 5. So for any variable in any year, you can get the top TIFs and bottom TIFs. You can see a lot of times it's these central ones. And then if you click on them, you can see it pulls the data from our CSV for that current data year. And if you change the year and take another one, you can then get all the different historic data. And it makes this little bar chart down here at the bottom for whatever the current selected variable is. So if you change that, it'll change as well. So yeah.
Wow.
Also, sorry if I could share my screen real quick. I also
Please.
created a PDF to help future TIF illuminators or anyone trying to work with TIF data. So the TIF data, the code that we created for the Shiny app. So this was created in R. This is just an R Markdown PDF. So the plain text is just like stuff that they could read, and then in these gray boxes is code chunks of code that they could just like, if they're familiar with R or like they have like basic coding skills, then they'll be able to recreate and even like edit things that we did in the Shiny app. So here's a little explanation of what the document is. And then this tells you which libraries are helpful to load in. All these hashtag comments are just automatically populated when you run, because this also runs the information. So these like hashtagged out comments they can ignore, but really what they want to look at is what we input as far as code, and then read the plain text and what the code is accomplishing. So for example, here in the code chunk below, we're reading in the updated CSV shapefiles from a local network and then transforming them to be able to be used to a map application. And it kind of just works like that, just kind of like telling you like what the code chunk is doing, what you need to put in, how like just information like that. So I
Wow.
thought we could also use that to
So if
pass it on.
if I have a how-to web page,
Mhm.
that sort of explains the data and the uh, visualization, by just downloading this document, someone who knows what they're doing, that's all they need. They don't need any special URLs. It's all here. Is that right?
Going to aim to try to publish the app so the people who might not have the R Studio experience or any sort of R experience could then just like go to that link and see the app in action. I think looking at Andreas's code that he shared in that R Markdown, like the only thing that users would have to do is maybe change the location where the data is saved, and the shape files are saved. Those would all be sort of unique to the user unless we like dump them into a Google Drive and like save the link, and then everyone has the same link to access the data and the shape files.
Okay. Andres, are you willing to put your name and contact information on the PDF, or is that too much? You don't want to be bothered by people.
That's fine. I can do that. Yeah.
Okay. So just know that, that'll be public, and you could get emails from somebody saying, "Hey, I'm not sure. Can you help me?" And I mean, I get calls all the time, so just
Yeah. No, that's fine.
certainly not mandatory, but would be very generous.
Okay. Yeah.
So Andreas, I have the app ready to go on my machine if you want me to show it off, and you could like talk us through it.
Yeah, you could run it. I'd love to see that.
Okay, great. Okay. And so there's the lovely Chicago colors fading in the gradient there. Here we have the entire spreadsheet at the bottom. So all 131 districts being displayed. And here's the heat map. We could zoom in. And this is for property tax extraction. And you could click on the shapefile and it'll tell you like what's the TIF and how much for that variable selected. Here, this yellow is the highest there. There's LaSalle Central at 161 million. And with this, here are all the various variables. We could do admin costs, and we see, again, there's LaSalle Central being the highest. That one seems to stand out. Kinsey Industrial Corridor, like transfers in, that there were quite a few that didn't have too many transfers in. That's why, there's a lot of this dark purple. But if we zoom in, there's some here like Cortland, Chicago River, the 25 million. That's probably, my guess is Lincoln Yards. And if we zoom in here, there's this weird mix like Wilson Yard, Bryn Mawr Broadway, Lawrence and Broadway, stuff like that. So you could still see some of these kind of pop here, but that's that all that R code there.
Wow. And this does it by year, or this is only for 2020?
This is only for 2022. We haven't we didn't get to tweak it for all the previous years. I think
that's what Andres was showing. Will was showing.
Will was showing that he was able to. Right. And so this is specific to 2022. We could tweak things a little bit if we knew we had all the shape files for the districts for those previous years, which we might. So we could add to that. So it could just be
Well,
you
this is
select a
this is
year.
great for 2022, but what Will was showing had that historical feature. Can that be placed
Right.
in some public way, or however you call it, a frame or a public face?
Yeah, we could easily well, I shouldn't say easily, but I think we could um throw that variable in as well, and then you could like by year see what the heat maps look like.
Because that was tremendously interesting when he was showing all the history, and you could just sort of go year by year and just see what was happening. If the two views aren't compatible, what I'm seeing here for 2022 is not exactly compatible with what Will did, then we'd have two different screens, one for history and one for the current year. That's fine.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Amazing, you all. This is quite amazing. But I just want to put on the record what it is that we have revealed, because that's the point of all this craziness. So this is the actual spreadsheet that was the result of the data mining, as explained by the interns, which were the annual reports of Chicago's tax increment financing districts for 2022. As they said, the city puts them up as discrete PDF files, which are pretty unusable for analysis by themselves. And as was mentioned, up until now, the way that we were able to access these PDFs is old school, opening them up one by one. This is a team of volunteers from the Civic Lab, and using a shared spreadsheet, creating a document pretty much like what I'm going to show now, which took days and days, as Mavis was saying. And now it's 15 minutes. It's pretty extraordinary, and I think it's a huge service, to the people of the city of Chicago and people who are trying to figure out important issues of finance, public policy, and civic priorities. It should be noted that Mayor Johnson is putting together his 2024 budget, even as we speak. And this information that we're going to show you will be quite important in the city debates that are going to happen over the next 6 months about how Chicago should spend its civic money in 2024. So the headline is at the bottom of the spreadsheet, where we see there were 131 TIF districts, and they extracted a total of $959 million. Let's call it $960 million. That's a lot of property taxes, my friends, that just disappeared, if you will, from the flow of what most people think property taxes are being used for. Most people think that when they pay their property taxes, they're helping to fund our schools, our libraries, the city of Chicago, the county, the city colleges, libraries, parks, and of course the essential services that make the city operate. That's what they think, but they don't realize that almost $1 billion of their public dollars, their property taxes, didn't make it to the finish line. It disappeared into 131 little piggy banks. So that's the first headline. Now, to me, that's a news flash, but that's just the beginning. Since these particular 131 TIFs were created, they have collected a total of $8.5 billion. So that's 131 TIFs that have been around for a long time. But there were another 36 TIFs that have been canceled. So they would not show up on any maps. And maybe someday we'll do a ghost map, of the invisible TIFs, just for yucks. But the Civic Lab has been tracking that over the years, and we may be the only outfit in town that can tell you that those canceled TIFs, the ones that are no longer around, 2.7 billion. That's what I meant to say. So if you add the 2.7 plus the 8.5, that gives us the 11.2 billion. $11.2 billion missing from our treasury from TIFs since 1986. Now, that sounds like just a bunch of numbers, but I have to put a pause here and say Chicago is still grappling with, we have no nurses in our public schools. So we have public health issues that are still troubling many communities. And to say that over the course of the last 30 years, $11 billion of public money went missing is pretty startling. We also tracked the transfers in, which we did about $70 million. So that's money coming into the TIFs. And we tracked the expenses, which were about 362 million. So these TIFs have been busy. They're not just passive. But the biggest number that we report is right here, how much money was left over in the TIF accounts at the end of 2022. And this is a record-breaking number, $2.5 billion. Now, this is a number that nobody in the city knows except you guys and now me. So, I mean, you can't really, I would assert that you could not have a conversation about the finances of the city of Chicago without knowing that number. Whoever you are, whether you're the mayor or a city council member or an advocate for healthcare or a reporter, even for that matter, someone who reports on civic finances. If you don't know that number, then you are you're sort of hopping. You're only on one leg, if you will. You have to fold that number into all your thinking and prognosticating, and opining about how is the city of Chicago doing? What should we be doing in 2024? Should we spend more on immigrants? We're being deluged with people and families from Texas that are throwing all these families at us. They're sleeping on the floors, in front of police stations. Is that right? Or it's the height of the summer, and we're talking about youth unemployment and gangs, kids with nothing to do, flooding downtown, and they're getting people all upset, and it's making it like a fear thing where we're afraid of our young people, and maybe we want to lock them up. So you're hearing that in the communities, these young people, because they have nowhere to go, they have no jobs. So maybe we should be spending more money on youth employment programs or youth after school things or summer employment, I should say, right? So all these issues that are in the headlines every single day are being held without reference to this number. So I would put it to you that we're going to add this number into those civic conversations. That's the purpose of this whole exercise. Now, whether the aldermen and the mayor and other advocates use this number is beyond our scope, right? We're just telling them this is a true thing. This is a real thing in the city of Chicago. What do you all think about it? And that's going to happen in the next few days when we create a press release and send it out to 1,400 people in the news media here in the city, Chicago area, as well as civic leaders all over the city. So to me, that is like a huge number. I never cease to amazed by it. But that to me is the big headline. Now we have other headlines as well. The transfers out and the surplus distribution, a total of $342 million. So basically 36% of all the money that was collected by TIFs was distributed in some way. So there's like a sham or a shell game inside of a shell game, if you follow me. In other words, this whole TIF process is a mystery. Most people don't understand it. But what we're saying, what your research has revealed, that inside the TIFs, there's yet another mystery of money moving around from projects to projects, and there's no accountability. It just happens pretty much on, I would say, the mayor say so or the commissioners say so, probably with the knowledge of the local city councilman. But that's it. So imagine if you are someone who's got kids in public school in a certain community and you're not happy with the way this public school is being run. Maybe there's no nurse, maybe there's no librarian, maybe they cut back on the sports, and you're paying your property taxes and you don't realize that not only are part of your property taxes being sucked up by a TIF, but some of that money is being moved out of your community miles and miles away for something you have no idea what it is. Right? And that's what this number reveals, that fully a little under 2/3, or a little over a third, I should say, a little over a third of all the money collected by TIFs doesn't stay where it is. It gets moved around, again, at the discretion of the mayor. And then we see about $13.5 million being sucked up by the Department of Planning for something called administrative costs. This is another little headline that we have found over the years that seems to me to be improper. The Department of Planning is a commissioner level agency that gets its budget approved every year, to do its job, but yet they get an extra like 13, 14 mil just because they can suck it as the TIF money flows by them. They just ding it. As you saw, not every single TIF, but many, many TIFs were dinged with an administrative cost. Well, wait a minute. Don't you got to have a crew, in the Department of Planning? That's your job. So no one's ever explained this. And we put it out there every year. And now you've discovered yet again, over the course of, 10 years that we've been doing this, that's on the order of $280 million. That's just been sucked up for extra administrative costs. That's a lot of paper pushing. I mean, that's a lot of staplers, my friends. You know what I mean? Somebody is either making a lot of money doing this inside the Department of Planning, or there's something going on here that should be explained. But anyway, we just found the numbers. We'll put it out there. But again, I think that is a service for accountability. In my opinion, someone has to explain to the people of Chicago why they're doing that. And then the final piece of information is the fact that some of these TIFs carrying debt. Now, this is something that's very opaque and nobody ever likes to talk about it. But as you see, these TIFs paid off $28 million in finance fees. And that's true year after year after year because these TIFs are paying down bonds. And it's completely hidden from the public view. And we don't know how many more years these debts continue. I mean, is this going to go on for another 10 years? So it's beyond the scope of our work to answer that question, but it raises, as you see, more questions. Are these good deals? What was the debt incurred for? We have some notion of what it was incurred for. Could we just walk away from these deals? Like just tell the banks, look, you've had enough of our money. We're just done. Right? And then we would be saving $28 million a year. Okay. Those are the headlines that you all have revealed. I'll stop sharing and let's go to Mavis, Will, and then Andres, and then to Phil. Please, if you wouldn't mind, just share your own insights, on this work and what you learned.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, I wasn't really familiar with this work at first. But even after the first intro meeting, like learning about all of the money that's just not being used, I don't know. I feel like it's just like obvious that like this information should be shown. Just because like all of this data is technically available to the public, but since it's presented in such a non-user friendly way that like people don't really understand what's going on. And I'm glad that I was able to be a part of the process that made it more accessible to the people. Yeah.
So like Mavis, I also am not local to the city of Chicago, but I am in Cook County. I'm in the south suburbs, over by the Calumet area. So I wasn't familiar with TIFs and how they work, which I'm sure even people who live in Chicago aren't familiar, because it's a pretty it's pretty hidden for a reason, like all the stuff that goes into it, as we've seen through this work. But yeah, I was just surprised to see like how difficult like a big government as big as like the city of Chicago makes it for information like that to even be found. Like within a 52-page PDF document, sometimes even the documents are as big as like 200 pages. Like all that information is like hidden in there. So I think that PDF scraper that Will and Mavis made was really, really useful for getting that information to a spreadsheet like how you and the TIF illuminators have used in prior years, that all that information is like readily available. This was my first time working with spatial data, like creating maps and stuff like that. In R, I'm myself pretty new to like coding languages, especially like I wasn't familiar with how like Python works or anything like that. But yeah, this was really unique experience for me to get to learn how to use real world data to present real world information.
So I guess for me, one of the biggest standouts was how we were, excuse me, talking about how everything's kind of like a shell game, and I feel like that just keeps coming up over and over again. I was looking through the data, so just a couple of different things I'll run off. One thing, how TIFs can be like reshaped. I noticed sometimes when one TIF get canceled, they'll change the shape of an existing one. So that just is one legal process that seemed not clear, maybe potentially unethical, at least for us as the consumers to understand what's going on. Sometimes TIFs will be canceled or extended beyond their period. So I noticed some that were like only created for a couple years, and they knew they were only going to be there for a couple years, which didn't seem like what the state law was created for. Um, there was one other thing. Oh, and when I was looking yesterday, I noticed there's sometimes there's TIFs that like 40th and State was one TIF that wasn't even listed on any district reports, but there was URLs accessible from, I think it was 2010 through 2014 for that TIF. There wasn't any values, but and then at Chatham Ridge was another TIF that like there was still reports accessible a year or two after it should have been canceled. Um, One thing also, like distribution of money, when TIFs end, it just goes to the treasurer, and we have no idea where that money goes, like a lot of the money in these TIF funds. So there's just all over the place. There's all sorts of shell games being done where it's just hard to follow the money. It's, requires significant thought to think about where did this money go and how is it being used. And there's just a lot of that going on, definitely. But it was a great opportunity for me to apply programming skills, learn new Python libraries to like figure out how to get this data out of there and make it public.
Awesome reflections. Professor Yates, you have the floor now, if you would.
Yeah, I just want to first of all thank all the hard work that Mavis, Will, and Andreas did. Especially early on leaning on Will and Mavis, because my summer project for the last like 5 summers, and it's never gone off the ground, is to become more familiar with Python. And so having 2 people as our Python experts on the team went a long way to get this project moving. Where I was definitely more comfortable was when we got to the R programming part of it, and so sort of learning how to really tweak these shiny apps and working with Andreas on that, and trying to I also did a little bit of a crash course in R for Mavis on the side. I don't know how successful that was for you, Mavis, but you've been exposed to it now. Great, thumbs up. So I was really lucky to have 3 awesome students to work with. It made the summer project super easy from a managing perspective. I think in terms of being a Chicago resident, I'll echo what Will was saying. And as far as it just being a shell game, I think that's the perfect way to phrase it. So, And it's good to know also from a, think about data visualization as far as, historical, trying to do historical data, the fact that these TIF districts change, like if one expires, then that region gets sort of consumed by an adjacent TIF district. I think that that's a challenge of trying to like plot it historically. I think you can do it, but yeah, again, Chicago doesn't make anything easy, it feels like. But yeah, that was the big thing for me, like going through the heat map just now and knowing the local news and knowing like, oh, why is this neighborhood, why is this TIF district like lighting up as being like a lot of money, and knowing that like, oh, it's right here in DePaul's backyard, type of thing. So yeah, so I loved coaching the students through this project, and this is the type of stuff that as a statistician, I want to work on projects for quote unquote the greater good. And so, something like this, I think, goes a long way to empowering people in the city to do what they want with the data.
Thank you, Professor. So we're gonna conclude this video in a moment, but this is Tom Tresser, the chief organizer with the TIF Illumination Project, a work of the Civic Lab, a Black-led nonprofit do tank based in Chicago. The TIF Illumination Project is one of our signature projects. This is the 10th year. And as you can see, we're data nerds. We're trying to do data liberation here. We're trying to untangle the shell game, because this is the people's money. This is all from the people's pockets. That property tax money is one of the most basic units of government, financing in the history of America, basically. It doesn't get much more basic than property taxes. And when that money goes missing, it's a note of concern for everyone. And as we've noted, Chicago public schools are the biggest consumers of property taxes, usually about 56 cents of the dollar. So if the headline for 2022 is something that Chicago TIFs took out $959.7 million, a subheadline would be Chicago public schools robbed of $500 million. Okay. And that's something that every school teacher, every parent of a child in school needs to know, especially there's concerns around the quality of the cleaning. Our schools are dirty. Special education is underfunded. English as a second language is underfunded. There's so many things happening. There's immigrant kids flooding into the schools who need services. So this is not a time to shortchange Chicago's public schools. So that could be people's one of the takeaways, one of the many possible takeaways of your work here. So to sum up, the Civic Lab and the TIF Illumination Project was working with the Chicago Metropolitan Data Science Corps, and the project leader was Professor Phil Yates at DePaul, and the three students were Mavis Wang, Will Feinberg, and Andres Meza. They did the work that we displayed that resulted in the headlines that I tried to give you a thumbs up on. What's going to happen now is the Civic Lab will send out a press release with this information, and we'll see where the chips fall. So that concludes this work. I'd say thumbs up and pop the champagne for all concerned. It really is a really great public service. And the Civic Lab thanks you all on behalf of the people, of the citizens of Chicago.